So first of all, I must thank Mr. Oberoi for inviting me on the foundation day of this place, and I'm so happy to be here. He's been interacting with me since I was a professor at IIM Bangalore, and we had a good time interacting. So I'm very happy to be associated and very happy to be here today. So what I'm going to talk to you, and this has been my view for a very long time. There's a TED talk on this, which I delivered a couple of years ago, saying what India is and where India actually belongs. As she just mentioned in the introduction, India was considered the golden bird, and I think we are not too far away. But let me first tell you the journey that we have had. And this story that you see on the screen is a very interesting story. For a very long time, you must be familiar with the word the Hindu rate of growth. For a very long time, India was a very slow moving economy. And suddenly, in 2014, the feeling was that we need to make this elephant fly, the slow moving but a steady economy. How do we do it? And there was this gap which was identified, industry. And why did we suffer on industry? The normal course of growth is first agriculture dominates, then industry takes over, then services take over. But here in India, we missed the industrial part very much because China in our neighborhood became the industry of the world. And therefore, porous borders would bring in industrial products into India and our industry suffered. 2014, suddenly the world rises and tells us, well, you have big dreams, but don't you know where you are? And that's the little tiger that you see there, the little tiger. Don't you know where you are? We know where we are. And in the next 5 years, we undertook some journey, which I'm going to share with you. And then I'm going to share with you what the potential of India is. And this is something which I think is very important for all of us to see. That picture which I showed you right now, I've translated it into data. And what does this picture show you? We are just a $2 trillion economy, not too much. We want to be a $5 trillion economy. But right now we are a $2 trillion economy. And what do we really aim at? We want to be America, which is nearly a $20 trillion economy. That's what we want to be. And the people who were with us for nearly 300 years, the Brits, and they're facing their own karma now, but the Brits are also a $2 trillion odd economy. And China has galloped much ahead of us. We started together. They started in 78. By 1980, we wanted to grow. Of course, we only started growing by 1991. Now, this picture that is on your screen shows you that we are about 2.63 trillion. America is way ahead. UK is the same. China is way ahead. But if you divide it by the population, the whole thing changes. India's population adjusted GDP, which we call the per capita income, as you can see, is far smaller than any of the other countries. So though our big cake is there, but the population is so large that per capita income suddenly becomes very small. So what does it imply? We need to really grow. Now, as mentioned in the introduction, and as you saw this data right now, America accounts for about 20% of world GDP. And India accounted for 33% of world GDP about 2000 years ago. You know that every newspaper, every TV channel, every tweet talks about America, America, America. You know more about America than probably you know of India. With just 20% of world GDP. And we were 33% of world GDP. It's not without reason that voyages would start from different places searching for India, and they would land up in some continent, some landmass, and name it India. We were so rich, and we continued our richness UK was rich for nearly a century. America took over. America has been the superpower for about 50 odd years after the Second World War. And now the time is coming very fast when China will take over. And I am intervening here, and I'm saying, why do you want that to happen? Why can't we jump in? And I'll tell you the reason why I'm trying to pitch in here is that China has suffered from the one-child policy which they followed for a very long time. There's a big demographic gap which is emerging in China. Fortunately, whatever happened during emergency, but we did not allow that one-child policy or a two-child policy. Now there is Nobel laureate Angus Deaton who is saying that every child that is born has one mouth, but two hands and 2 feet. And that's exactly what Mr. Pandit just mentioned, that our 5,000-year-old tradition taught us labor, hard work. And therefore, the world has come round the corner now, and Angus Deaton getting his Nobel Prize on that very book. So, India, not having followed that one-child policy, is now in a position to supply, and we'll talk more about it, now in a position to supply labor to the rest of the world. And that is where we have a great chance to come back, and that's why I think we should not allow this golden opportunity right in front of us to slip and go to China. But the point that I'm trying to make, 100 odd years for UK, 70 odd years for America being the superpower, and now the fight has become where the superpower mental will, the crown will come and land, India or China. But just imagine, for 3,000 years, not 1 century, not half a century, for 3,000 years, we were the richest country on this planet. Richest country. Others can't even hold it for even 1 century. Something must be in the DNA, and we'll talk more about it. So let's continue our journey. Here is India in the global setting. I have spoken about the 4 countries in the previous slide. This gives you a much larger picture. It talks about Russia, Brazil, and puts the whole setting together for you to see. We have a long way to go. What's happening now? As we are sitting here and talking, in April 2019, just a few days back, actually last weekend, the IMF and World Bank released this data. And what does this data tell you? That this is the advanced countries. As you can see, the growth is going to slow down in days to come. But if you look here, India is going to be the country which is the fastest growing country on the planet. And let me tell you, and I'm going to show you this data right away, where we will show that for the next 5 years, we'll be the fastest. But I have worked at the IMF in Washington. I can tell you for next 25 years, we will be the fastest. There is nobody else in the world who can take this away from us. And that's why I'm telling you, China's folly in the one-child policy is going to show us very quickly here. We have overtaken China as far as growth is concerned, so we'll be the fastest growing, and for a long time. And I must mention this to you. China is the only country in recorded history which grew at 10% per year for 30 years at a stretch. 10% per year for 30 years at a stretch. By the way, India grew above 10% only for 1 year in the last 50 years. Just 1 year. And you see the difference? The self-esteem, the confidence, and everything that you see. Imagine China grew for 30 years like that. On an average, if you look at the average India's growth, it's around 7%. So we are way behind it. But I think we have the potential. IMF is now predicting that in the medium term, India will stabilize around 7.75%. And in my tweets, you will see I have challenged it. And I'll tell you why I have challenged it in a few minutes from now. Now, this is the picture as far as the World Bank IMF is concerned, that till 2024, India is the fastest growing country. And this is the latest data that we have updated after the last weekend. India is the fastest growing country for the next 5 years. No challenge here. And then This is how the external sector relationship will emerge. And please notice, India is the deficit country. India is not manipulating its exchange rate. India is not Germany. India is not China, playing a very responsible role. Exchange rate is where it is. I have always argued it is too high. It should slide to 85. If China were to be in India, they would have moved it to 100 rupees a dollar. But we are not that. China has done what it had to, but India is maintaining its exchange rate. Still, our external sector deficit normally should be less than 3%, will be in the range of 2.5%, which is a healthy range. Here is inflation. Now, some inflation is essential, should not be hyperinflation like in Zimbabwe or earlier days in Germany. We will be around 4 to 4.55%, which I think is a very healthy rate of inflation. Now, this is something which I want to bring to your notice, the human resources. And you can see for yourself where we are, the advanced countries and the emerging countries. We will be the country with the largest amount of population. We will be the reservoir of labor force. They may come out with artificial intelligence. They may come out with robots. But they have to run the trains. And if you go to Western countries, go to Germany, go to France, even go to America, these artificial intelligence and driverless cars are still far, far away. You will need humans, and the only place you will find them are in India. They are just vanishing everywhere else. If you look at the picture, which is the working age population, it's India for the next 30 odd years, which will have the main workforce. So that's why I said the potential is here. And that is where I think Mr. Pandit's presentation is very relevant, where we talk of entrepreneurs, we talk of MSMEs. The government can't give you that many jobs. The private sector, of course, if it has to compete globally, they will be using AI and the robots. Who will create the jobs? Therefore, labor and initiative has to be there at the end of each one of us. And that's why I think his presentation was very right when he said, right for the last 5,000 years, this is exactly what is taught in the Indian psyche. You have to work hard. Udam, the point that he was making, the Udam. We need to work hard. We need to take initiative. Broadly, this is where the country is. And this throws quite a bit of data. Talks about literacy rate, which is around 73%. And also talks about the birth rate and the death rate. And these are very important. You know, and I'm sure you are aware of this, 2.1 child per woman is the replacement rate. In Western countries, in many countries, it has gone below 1%. So therefore, there's no replacement taking place. In some countries, it is 0.8. India, it's still on the positive side. The death rate has become, because of the medical facilities and now because of the toilet facilities, which the Prime Minister spoke from the ramparts of the Red Fort and has started showing results, the death rate is pretty competitive. Now, though we are talking of income, but within the country, there are too many disparities on income. And I think one has to take care. You must have heard about it. The income inequalities are rising. And to bridge this gap, it's important that MSMEs or entrepreneurs will have to do better. Now, when it comes to literacy rate, you should see the difference. How from 1951, when we were just 18%, we have come to the present 73%, which is a very positive sign. And I'm sure the schools, the colleges, the MBA institutions, universities are playing a role in this movement. This is one slide which I want you to ponder upon. The data 73-74. We are, as you can see, half the population is below the poverty line. Today, that's not the situation. The data which the latest we have is 11-12, and about 30%, that's what is quoted all the time. But what I want to point here is, that for 3,000 years, we were the richest country on the planet. About 1,000 years back, we were still accounting for about 20% of world GDP. In 1600, when this East India Trading Company came here, we were still around 15% of world GDP. And in 1947, when they left us, our literacy rate was around 12%. Our poverty rate was around 90%. Let me repeat. When they took over in 1600 and came in the garb of an East India Trading Company, India was accounting for 15% odd world GDP. When they left us in 1947, we had the poverty rate of 90%. And the country is growing, and the population is expanding. Health facilities aren't there. The birth rate is high. And still, we brought the poverty ratio to 30%, which is a great achievement for Indian policymakers. But herein, I have a hypothesis which has not been explored, tested, or popularized. I know why the British left India. There is Subhash Chandra Bose, there is Mahatma Gandhi. But I, as an economist, have a different hypothesis. When the richness of the country had been siphoned off, so much so that the bone marrow of the Indian and the economy had been sucked off, the cost of maintaining the British Raj here was higher than the revenue that they would have got. And that is why the opportune, the exploitative Brits decided, well, time to go. That's the economic hypothesis that I have, and someday when I retire, I'll write on it. Okay, now this is between us. I've shown you the global picture. We are doing very well as far as global fiscal story is concerned. But this is something within our own country, which I wanted to show you, that deficits are high. And nothing to panic here. There's nothing technical. Deficit is a gap between expenditure and revenue. As was mentioned by Mr. Pandit, earn with 100 hands, but then do charity with 1,000 hands. In India, unfortunately, in the last 7 odd decades, something is going wrong. Our expenditure is much higher than our receipts. So deficits have been little high. Are we an outlier in the world? No. Should we worry? No. But between us, we need to think, why is it so high? And obvious reason is tax collection is low. And here is the data which I have plotted for you over a long time. And what do you see here? The tax to GDP or tax to income ratio is just around 18%. Now you want the best roads in the world, you want 5-star hospitals, you want excellent educational institutions, but you don't want to pay tax. The global tax collection rate for countries like Sweden is above 40%. Even countries like America, which I showed you in the initial chart, is about 35%. And in India, whatever you do, it doesn't go above 18%. What do you do in such a situation? Obviously, you have to take some drastic step. And please take a second to read this slide. This is the most important slide of public finance that anybody can share with you. And I've just put it on the tweet today because I heard over and over again that demonetization is being cursed all the time. Look at this slide. Nobody wants to pay tax. Nobody wants to pay tax. There are and this is of 2013. Individuals, companies, they're registered. But when it comes to filing a return, sorry, and it comes to declaring the income, absolute sorry. Do you think a country can run like this? And look at this slide. This is the worst. In this slide, you see nobody is declaring even their income. And you see the luxurious cars on the road. You see 5-star hotels totally full. You see villas on sale. Airlines are complete capacity flying. But nobody wants to declare their income. That is why the tax GDP ratio was low. That is why the deficits were a little high. What do you do if you were in that situation as a policy maker? What would you do? You would do demonetization. You had no alternative. So, let me also share one more thing with you. The first demonetization took place in 1946, when the Brits were still here. And you know why? In 1934, the Reserve Bank of India, the central bank of this country, was made. April 1, 1935, the RBI Act 1934, April 1, 1935, the RBI comes into existence. They come out with high denomination notes, 10,000 rupee note, 1,000 rupee note, 5,000 rupee note. And you know what happened? The Brits realized that tax collection to the Queen has suddenly dipped. And that is why in 1946, the first demonetization took place, where they said high denomination value notes have to be removed. And I tell you, this is not rocket science. I worked in the Reserve Bank for about 2 decades. It's very simple. I print a 100 rupee note, put it into the system, people put it in their pocket, some put it in the different places, it gets soiled, and 6 months later, the Reserve Bank receives a soiled note in its currency chest. And this soiled note has to be noted and destroyed and incinerated. I put a 10 rupee note. Within a few months, it comes back to the Reserve Bank. It has to be burnt and destroyed. I put in a 50 rupee note. Within 3 months, it comes out totally soiled, burnt. I put in a 500 rupee note. It never comes here. No rocket science. I put in a 1,000 rupee note. It does not come here. Where does it go? It's obvious where it goes. So that is why the demonetization is not the first time. 1946 we did demonetization. We repeated it. Tax amnesty schemes have come out with 10-year regularity. No money comes out. Obviously, then somebody has to use the sledgehammer. And this fight against corruption continues. GSTs, another technique wherein corruption probably would be controlled. The burning issue that has been talked about in this country now for nearly 5 years is that the public sector banks, who account for 80% of total banking activity in the country, that the public sector banks have put the money and it has all gone bad. 10 lakh crore has gone bad. Yes, I was a commercial banker before I went to the Reserve Bank. And then I worked at the IMF, so I have a complete idea of where the whole banking system works. No doubt about it. But here is a track record of India. Unsaid, unsung heroes. Look at the non-performing assets. 20%. When we first assembled this data in 92, after the reforms in 1991, more than 20% assets were bad. Silently we brought it to 2 to 3%. They've gone up again. We'll bring them down again. So nothing to worry about. But here is the global picture. Look at the advanced countries. They're much higher than us. And we, in the last 2-3 years, it became worse. And I'm telling you a genuine story. When somebody is in ICU, say for some reason, and you want to do another body test and MRI and all the diagnostics, obviously the results will not be good. When the global economy is shaking, the world trade is shaking, Lehman Brothers after 2008, the economy has not recovered, you put the banks to a test and say they are bad. And then after calling them bad, you go back to your professorial job abroad and leave it in lurch. So I think these assets we are in a position to recover and will recover. Now my next few slides are very sensitive slides. Basel norms you all have heard. But look at the Basel standards and look at India's standards. Tougher than all the Basel norms, Indian standards. Why? Why Indian business, Indian banker, Indian population, Indian taxpayer? Why can't you rely upon them? Why do you make laws tougher? Because each of this Basel norm implies a cost on the bank. I've raised capital. Capital is not free. I've raised capital. If I have to make provisions and keep it safe, I incur a cost. The capital which a bank has is meant for lending. When I raise capital, could be deposits, I pay a cost. When I lend, I recover the cost. But if you make the laws stiffer than the global standards, then the Indian banker incurs a higher cost. And so our norms were much higher, both. Yes, the banking system to some extent was safer, but I think the cost was very high. Now the other thing which I'm saying is Basel norms were meant for internationally active banks. But in our country, there are banks which don't even have a single branch outside. And their external exposure portfolio is very low. Basically, 4 of our banks, 3 public sector and 1 private sector bank is internationally active. So maybe Basel norms should not have been applied universally to all the banks in the country. Look here. In many parts of the world, it's not the Reserve Bank which regulates the banks and supervises. Maybe we need the Reserve Bank to focus only on monetary policy, and regulatory and supervisory work could be done by other agencies as in other advanced and in emerging countries. The prompt corrective action, which sort of took 11 banks out of 21 public sector banks out of active lending activity, is not something which is practiced globally. And I showed you the non-performing assets, global, about 20 countries, global and emerging, advanced and emerging, global and India. But PCA has been only adopted by very few countries. Now, when the banks stop lending, the manufacturing, the MSMEs, micro, small, medium, the entrepreneurs, they suffer. And that is why a little shock that happened to the economy. Okay, so I took you on a little tour of where the economy is. I've given you a global picture, a comparison saying that everything is going to be super good. Advanced countries, IMF and the World Bank are saying India is going to be the fastest growing country. I've shown you the data which says that our demographic is very, very good, so we need not worry. Very young population. I've shown you also some concerns, basically the banking concerns and also the tax evasion corruption, which can be harmful for the country. And now let's look at the country as it is. The picture in the next few years is extremely promising as far as India is concerned. American economy and the Europeans are badly suffering. American economy is expected to slip into a recession this very year, as predicted by Paul Krugman, another Nobel laureate. The Europeans are worried, how is Brexit going to play it out? Nobody knows. I've spoken to a couple of Brits, I've spoken to a couple of Europeans. Some of them wanted good riddance, some feel no, we'll not be able to handle it because so globally integrated Europe and UK. Very, very uncertain world. India is a destination which is stable. Second, oil prices, which shakes India many a times. Oil prices now are stabilizing in the range, and this is the range expected in the next 25 to 30 years. So as far as predictions till 2050 are concerned, range bound. So we are one country in the short and medium term which is going to be a very stable country, and therefore the productive activities, the young demographics in the country will have time to flourish and expand. Now here is emerging India, and I am saying it's going to be the favored nation of the world. And why is it going to be the favored nation of the world? We have excellent financial markets. We have reputed regulators. And therefore there is faith in the world that India is a place where you can go and put your money. India is a place which can be very productive and serve as an engine of growth for the rest of the world. Something very interesting about India, there can be bitter elections. There can be more bitter elections. We have seen it in 2014. But still, country continues. The reforms agenda, the ideology continues. Since 91, parties have changed. Sometimes prime ministers have changed more rapidly than the election times. But economic progress, ideology, and reforms have continued unabated. So therefore, elections can happen, but political stability in the country is extremely promising. Corruption has been attacked. As I've mentioned, GST and demonetization have played a role, and therefore a destination worth the time. So what I look at India as, also mentioned by Mr. Pandit, that this is a country which traces its history to Indus Valley civilization, thousands of years, and timeless Vedas, fountain of knowledge. And as Mr. Pandit just explained, what was true in the Rig Veda, the oldest Veda, is true even today. So that continuity continues and is here. And then, it has been the richest country of the world, and we are experienced. It is in our DNA. 75 odd 80 years ago, when the Brits left us, they left us seeping in poverty. Literacy rate, the lowest. And today, tell me a country which can survive without an Indian. An Indian will be either sitting in their computers or doing a mundane work of driving their taxi. That's what India is. And within 70, 75 years of independence, the country has bounced back, that today no political decision on this planet can be taken without India. That's the DNA. That's the DNA of India. And just imagine in the next 50 years where we will be. So, I think we are the future of the world, and we have a golden future that we can explore. The Silicon Valley phenomena, which is all across the world spoken about, tell me, is Bangalore, Hyderabad, and Chennai anyway inferior to that? So we are replicating it. Now, what is it that makes me so confident that India is going to resurge? And I think it is the 5,000 years of our glorious past. What is that 5,000 years? I think India is the only country on this planet where different ideologies survive together. It's the only country on the planet which has so many religions and which has been a birthplace of so many religions. It's the only country on this planet where there are proponents which say that not a leaf can move without God's order. And there are proponents which took origin here and got enlightenment on this Bodh Gaya, which say God doesn't exist. And both these ideologies coexist in this country. That strength only this country has. So that is why I say strategic thinking, meticulous planning, perfected over the last 5,000 years, open to ideas, debates, and consensus, and respect for others, live and let live, flourish and let others flourish, and good financial sector, something which lubricates the economy. So therefore, the population is hardworking by their very DNA, by their very culture, by their very religion. And now, as I see India, we have already looked east and we have discussed about our east policy. I'm saying, let's look at Central Asia. And these countries of Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, let's look at these also and take them in our fold. If properly planned and strategized, I think a day is not far when we will go back to United States of South Asia. Or at least we'll have a single currency, because this will be the part of the world where the gravity will move. Already, UK moved to USA and is shaking there after the Lehman Brothers. China and India are waiting in the cusp, and it's time that India takes over the challenge. We started with a picture, and we wondered. And we said, can the elephant fly? It's a slow-moving country. Can the elephant fly? And I'm of the opinion, in Air India, join us. Not only the elephant, even the dragon can fly. Thank you.